Part 5, I'd like to speak about FDA executive orders. Now, all these orders that I am speaking to are actually cited in the FDA final rule. So, this comes out of Executive Order 12866, Federal Register Volume 58, Number 190, Regulatory Planning and Review, October 4th, 1993, Title III, the President, Regulatory Planning and Review. And this was signed into law by, not into law, but it was executed by William Jefferson Clinton. And it reads as follows. The American people deserve a regulatory system that works for them, not against them, without imposing unreasonable costs on society. Now that's just one part that I'm going to read there. And what that means is, for instance, the FDA final rule is really working against the vaping community. And it is imposing unreasonable costs on society, not only the vaping community, but mainly on the vaping industry. And to go through the PMTA process cost you in 2016 $599,000. It's a lot of money. A lot of money. Most vape shops who mix their own e-liquid cannot afford that, let alone even some hardware manufacturers may not even be able to afford that. If they have something like, 50 RDAs and 50 variable wattage devices and 50 fully mechanical box mods and 50 true mech mods, and then just to add on a little bit more, how about if you have 100 drip tips? You're in serious trouble. That's about what, 300-400 applications you're going to have to submit. You times that by $599,000 for each application, you're talking millions of dollars. So therefore, they are definitely, what the FDA final rule did, it violated this particular Executive Order 12866, even though the FDA cited that in the FDA final rule. Because it imposes an unreasonable cost onto the vaping industry. I'll go on now. In deciding whether and how to regulate, agencies should assess all costs and benefits of available regulatory alternatives, including the alternatives of not regulating. Now, that's a perfect thing. Now, remember, the FDA cited this in the FDA final rule. That is Executive Order 12866. Okay? What it is, this executive order, what it does is it directs an agency on how to manage their affairs, so to speak. So it says right there, it says, as far as the costs and the benefits are concerned, with the FDA final rule, the costs actually overtake, I guess you could say, or overpower the benefits. In other words, the costs of doing business after the FDA final rule is in place, it costs more than the benefit itself. So that completely, the FDA completely also violated that particular section of Executive Order 12866. And not only that, it says in here, including the alternatives of not regulating. In other words, the FDA could have said, well, this will really cost the vaping industry way too much money. Let's not even regulate them. They had the power through this executive order to actually say, after we look at everything and figure it all out, it's not really worth losing, having this vaping industry lose jobs and lose their companies and their vape shops and all. Well, just, put it aside. Okay? Now, in section 1B5, it states, it shall design its regulations in the most cost-effective manner. Well, it's definitely not cost-effective manner. Actually, like I was talking about in part 2, as far as financial, it's all about making money, not only for the FDA through contracts, but also actual research companies and research labs and institutions and organizations, associations also profit as well. You have to go to part 2 to understand all that. And it's part 2, subpart A, subpart B. So they definitely also violated that as well. It shall design its regulations in the most cost-effective manner. $599,000. Here. You want to see what $599,000 is? To just do this drip tip, this tiny drip tip, this little tiny drip tip will cost you $599,000 in the year of 2016 to submit an application for just this drip tip. Doesn't sound very cost effective to me, does it to you? Section 1B6, reasoned determination that the benefits of the intended regulation justify its costs. Once again, in the year 2016, it will cost you to submit an application just for this drip tip, $599,000. To just submit this one application for this drip tip. Does the benefit of having just a drip tip, does that justify its costs? In other words, does it justify $599,000 for this one drip tip? See, and that's what's going on in here. And, you know, like I said, the FDA cited this Executive Order 12866 in the FDA Final Rule and completely violated every single solitary section in the Executive Order 12866. All right, to the next one. Section 1B7. Each agency shall base its decision on the best reasonably obtainable scientific, technical, and economic information. Well, they definitely didn't have scientific information because they have said, and when I read the FDA Final Rule, all they speak about is, well, you know, we have to do more studies to figure out the science behind vaping, to see the ill effects if there are any. So apparently, it says each agency shall base its decisions on the best reasonably obtainable scientific information. It failed at that too. Completely failed. Section 1B11. Each agency shall tailor its regulations to impose the least burden on society, including individuals, businesses of differing sizes. So they certainly violated that one as well, because it definitely affects me, affects you. Because if we don't have vaping products, eventually we're going to go and turn to analog cigarettes. I probably won't go back to analog cigarettes. I mean, if there were absolutely no vaping products, or I should say absolute, because I have plenty hardware. But let's say, for instance, if there was no more e-liquid on the market, okay? Absolutely none. I'm not the type of person to go into the black market to do that. I will definitely do it yourself, which is completely the FDA, and I'll speak to that when I speak about the FDA Final Rule. Do it yourself. They can't regulate that, okay? Now the flavor companies and the nicotine companies and the VG companies and the PG companies have to submit a registration to the FDA, but they don't have to go through the whole PMTA process because it's the finished product or the manufacturer finished product, and I'll speak to this in the FDA Final Rule. is where those particular people or companies have to go through the FDA PMTA process, pre-market process, SE process, or certification process. It's only the person that finishes a product. For instance, if you go to a vape shop and they mix their own e-liquid, well, that's a finished product when they hand it to you. On the other hand, if the vape shop hands you just VG, that's okay. That's legal. Of course, that vape shop owner has to register that VG and how many bottles he has or she has in the store and all this other stuff. But that is not a finished product. An e-liquid, a complete e-liquid like this, is a finished product. So the e-liquid manufacturer has to go through the whole entire FDA application process. So it affects individuals, because if there's no e-liquid on the market, I'm either going to do it yourself, or I'm going to go back to smoking cigars, which are very expensive. Because when it comes to cigars, I have a very expensive taste bud, and I don't really want to go to that route. But if I did go back to any kind of analog cigarettes, it would definitely be cigars. And then it also talks about businesses of differing sizes. It could be from Eton, who make millions of dollars, to maybe a smaller company that makes maybe 2 mech mods in America. That maybe only put out maybe, I don't know, maybe if they do it themselves without taking the patent and giving it to a Chinese manufacturer to actually make, if they actually manufacture it in their own home or shop or whatever in America, it wind up costing them a lot of money to submit these 2 mech mods or fully mechanical box mods. So it does affect different businesses of differing sizes, from Eton to the little guy in a garage somewhere making a 2 mech mod in America. So they need to tailor its regulations to impose the least burden on these particular very small businesses, like one guy making a 2 mech mod by hand, in a garage somewhere. That one individual can't afford $599,000 application, as opposed to Eton that may be able to do so. Actually, they probably will be able to do so. So once again, they violated that. Then in section 1B12, each agency shall draft its regulations to be simple and easy to understand, with the goal of minimizing the potential for uncertainty and litigation arising from such uncertainty. Wow, that is a big one. That is a huge, big one. This is the reason why Nicopure, Lost Art Liquids, the Kellerman law firm eventually is going to file lawsuits and plenty other lawsuits. And it's because of the uncertainty in the marketplace, because they're unsure how the marketplace is going to be in the next 3 years from now. So they're trying to stop it from happening. And so Section 1B12 of Executive Order 12866 is very important, because what it says is the goal of minimizing the potential for uncertainty and litigation arising from such uncertainty. You understand? They're supposed to minimize that. And what they're going to wind up with is several lawsuits. Once again, they've violated that Executive Order 12866. And then in Section 3D, regulation or rule means the agency intends to have force and effect of law. In other words, and I'll speak to this in the FDA final rule, as well as in the Tobacco Control Act of 2009, certain agencies, it's not all the federal agencies, but there are certain agencies and the FDA has this power as well. This is one of the agencies that has the power. It's called enabling power. That's ENBLING power. And what it does is they're able to not only regulate whatever market they want, but they also can enforce it as well. They can penalize you with civil fines. They could criminally prosecute you. Of course, they probably go through the U.S. Department of Justice, but I'm sure that the FDA will, get all their paperwork together to file this complaint through the U.S. Department of Justice. Criminally prosecute you. They can put injunctions on your product lines. They can seize your property. Yeah, that's called the enabling powers, and that's what the FDA has. They have that. In other words, the regulation or the rule that they, like the FDA final rule, is an actual law, and it not only has the effect of law, that is, it affects the marketplace, but also has force, which means they can enforce it as well. That's how much power that the FDA has. And once again, they've taken that force of law and applied it very well. And this is the reason why Nicopure and I believe also Lost Art Liquids, I never read their complaint, but I got a little summary of it. But definitely Nicopure is going against one of the reliefs they're asking for is the abuse of discretion, because they definitely abused their discretion when it came to this law here, the FDA final rule. The effect of the FDA final rule is over-regulation, and they're going to enforce it as well, which can put people out of business. They could have their properties seized. They can even be criminally prosecuted, and they actually say that when I read the FDA final rule, they actually say in there that they can criminally prosecute you, meaning the vape shops, manufacturers. Okay, so that's that particular executive order 12866. Now I want to speak to executive order 13132. August 4th, 1999, Federal Register, Volume 64, Number 153, Title 3, The President, Federalism. And this is also with William Jefferson Clinton. I'm going to take a vape real quick here. Okay, so in Section 2D it states, the people of the states are free to define the moral, political, and legal character of their lives. And what's very important in that particular line is legal character. You understand? That is, the FDA final rule is all about over-regulation, which infringes on your constitutional rights. And that's why the vaping industry are filing lawsuits, because it also infringes on corporations. And now, if you understand corporations, they're also persons. That changed with the 14th Amendment, and I don't want to get too deep into this law here. But after the 14th Amendment was passed, corporations were also persons, which they were also protected just like you and I. They have as many, the corporation itself, the company itself, has as many rights as you and I as individuals. And that is the legal character of their lives. So not only the legal character of you and I as individuals, but also the legal character of the company and corporation itself. And this is also a basis of filing lawsuits as well. Section 3A. There shall be strict adherence to constitutional principles. Okay? Well, apparently through the FDA overregulation, They violated their First Amendment rights as well. That's in Nuclear as well as Lost Art Liquids LLC. They also are filing under that as well as many other constitutional principles or constitutional rights that companies, corporations / persons have. And once again, it says strict adherence, not liberal, not lenient, strict adherence to constitutional principles, which the FDA final rule completely violates. And then there's Executive Order 13563, January 18th, 2011, Federal Register, Volume 76, Number 14, Title 3, the President, Improving Regulation and Regulatory Review. And this was signed in this was executed by Barack Hussein Obama. And, he's the one who approved of the FDA final rule through the Office of Internal Regulatory Affairs on down to the Office of Management and Budget, down to the Secretary of Health and Human Services, right to Mitch Zeller, the Commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration. Anyway, Section 1A, our regulatory system must protect public health while promoting economic growth, innovation, competitiveness, and job creation. It must be based on the best available science. It must all for public participation and an open exchange of ideas. It must promote predictability and reduce uncertainty. It must identify and use the best, most innovative, and least burdensome tools for achieving regulatory ends. It must take into account benefits and costs, both quantitative and qualitative. It must ensure that regulations are accessible, consistent, written in plain language, and easy to understand. It must measure and seek to improve the actual results of regulatory requirements. And people wonder why I'm so much against Obama. He is such a hypocrite. It's incredible. On every policy known to mankind, at least under his administration. And this was his own executive order that he wrote in the year of that he executed in the year of 2011, which was right about the time when the and if you go to part 2, the financial aspect of it, the stakeholders meetings. This is right when the FDA started to get interested in a strategy to regulate the e-cigarette industry. But here it says, protect public health while promoting economic growth innovation. And all the FDA final rule does, if it's left completely in place and is enforced completely, will definitely wipe out economic growth and innovation. Right there, complete contradiction and complete violation of that executive order. And then it also says it must be based on the best available science. No. They have no substantial data. Actually, that Senator Johnson from the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, it's mainly Governmental Affairs, actually requested for the FDA to comply. I actually did a video of that already. I think it was called FDA and Homeland Security Misconception video. I uploaded it on YouTube. Senator Johnson is asking the FDA for certain information because they have no substantial scientific data to back up any of this FDA final rule. And yet it says right here in this Executive Order 13563, the best available science. Well, they have no best available science, and yet they still published the FDA final rule in the Federal Register on May 10th, 2016. And it says an open exchange of ideas. In fact, if you read the FDA final rule, all of the comments that were submitted, they were selected on a very biased manner. The FDA selected certain comments. There was, I can't remember exactly how much, like 250 comments out of like 10,000 comments that were submitted, or what, something like that. 5,000 comments submitted. They only chose like about 250 comments, and then they spoke to those comments in the FDA final rule, and I would say 95% of those comments the FDA disagreed with. And they're supposed to have an open exchange of ideas. There is definitely bias with the FDA, absolute bias. And it says it must promote predictability and reduce uncertainty. And that's the reason why, like I said just a moment ago, why there's going to be so many lawsuits. Because it creates uncertainty in the marketplace. Who knows what it's going to be like in 3 years, unless we do something about it now, through legislation, as well through like the Cole-Bishop Amendment, or through lawsuits. Because this FDA final rule created uncertainty in the marketplace. And then, of course, written in plain language and easy to understand. You're right. Yeah. You have lawyers that have worked on the Nicopure complaint for 3 months. They're going to spend millions of dollars on this lawsuit. Have many attorneys working on it. Have researchers. You have legal secretaries, paralegals. You'll have analysts. You have scientific analysts. They're going to have to do their own testing of certain things to bring across to the courts. And it's going to cost millions of dollars to do. Let alone if it goes into the appellate court, that's going to cost at least another million or more. And they're saying here in this executive order 13563, well, as long as it's easy to understand and written in plain language. A freaking joke is what it is. It's a one big con is what it is. And I don't only blame Zeller and Ms. Matthews, the Health and Human Services Secretary. I don't blame the OMB as well, and I don't blame the Office of Internal Regulatory Affairs. Not only do I blame not just them, which I do blame them, but most of all, I blame Obama, because he wrote this executive order which he completely violated himself when he approved of the FDA final rule. Because he, in fact, has to approve of any rule that comes out of, especially out of an enabling power like the FDA. Because it's the full force and effect of law. You understand? So the Obama has to say, okay, that's fine with me. I only read about 4 pages of it, but it's fine with me. I have some other things to do. I have to go to Hawaii for a vacation. So anyway, so next part, Section 4. Each agency shall identify and consider regulatory approaches that reduce burdens and maintain flexibility and freedom of choice for the public. Yeah. Well, if the FDA final rule had its way, let's say hypothetically, and thank goodness it's just hypothetically, but let's say there are no lawsuits and no legislation against the FDA final rule, and the FDA final rule just went on by itself as it is, along with all the upcoming draft guidances as well as the ones that have been already published, and just went full steam ahead. And then in the year of May 10th of 2019, after those 36 months are up, it says here in Executive Order 13563, executed by Obama, it says, freedom of choice for the public. Probably about 75 to 95% of the vaping market will literally be gone vanished. And what kind of choice do you have in the marketplace then? Very, very little choice. So, once again, they violated this Executive Order 13563. Section 5. Each agency shall ensure the objectivity of any scientific and technological information and processes used to support the agency's regulatory actions. So they have to objectively have scientific and technological information and processes in order to support the FDA final rule, which, by the way, they do not have. So once again, they violated that as well. In fact, they even say it in the FDA final rule that they don't have that substantial scientific data. But hey, we're going to do it anyway. We're going to have these regulatory actions regardless if we have substantial scientific data or not. Why? Well, because we're an enabling power and we can do whatever we like. Section 6A. Agencies shall consider how best to promote retrospective analysis of rules that may be outmoded, ineffective, insufficient, or excessively burdensome, and to modify, streamline, expand, or repeal them in accordance with what has been learned. They haven't learned a thing, is what they've learned. All they know to do is make more regulations. They're not streamlining. They're not like it says, outmoded, ineffective, insufficient, or excessively burdensome. If the FDA final rule, which is supposed to be all about public health, had its way and you had no legislation in the works and you had no judicial complaints or anything in the litigation going on, and the FDA final rule just moved full speed ahead on May 11th, 2019 in 36 months' time, then the entire point of the FDA final rule is supposed to be for promoting public health, and most of the vapors will not have really any products to choose from, and they will wind up going back to analog cigarettes or do-it-yourself, which some people might not even be able to handle or understand very well, and there might be nicotine poisonings and all kinds of things in a bad way. And so, therefore, because of that excessively burdensome FDA final rule, it's not at all protecting or promoting public health. Because, in fact, I'll go you one better, the FDA final rule is outmoded, ineffective, insufficient, and excessively burdensome. The government, it's not even a question of the federal government ever learning, because they don't. The federal government, for instance, I'll just use the FDA. In order for the FDA, and you have to go to Part 2, called Financial, Subpart A, Subpart B of this particular project I'm doing here, to understand it fully. And that is, in order for the FDA final rule to move forward, it must hire more and more people. And I'll get into that with the FDA final rule as far as the man hours, or they call it the burden hours. But the man hours that the FDA will have to implement is over 1 million. Over 1 million hours that they have to implement. And how do they do that? Well, guess how they do that. They not only hire, or not hire, but they not only do, well, in a sense they hire, but they not only contract research labs and organizations, associations, institutions to do all the testing of these applications, but they also have to, and she even said it herself, Mrs. Matthews, of the Health and Human Services Secretary, she even said it herself, that they're going to have to, they said it on the FDA website, that they're going to have to hire even more people. They're in the process of hiring more people to work at the FDA in order to process all these applications. So all it does is expand the FDA administration. It gets more bloated, it gets more excessive, you have more red tape, more bureaucracy, and they have never learned anything at all because, like it says, to streamline, they need to streamline it. They need to actually minimize instead of expand. They need to not hire so many people. They need to take that FDA final rule and flush it down the toilet is what they need to do. Well, maybe not flush it down the toilet. Maybe some parts in there to have some regulation, but not so like regulation on like minors. Anyone under 21 or, well, federal statutes only can permit the agencies to put the age restriction at 18 and under. Now, states can do whatever they like. They could have it so you could be 50 years old, you can't vape. Until you're 50 years old, you can't vape. I mean, they could never get it through the state legislatures, but the states can actually do that. But the federal government, as far as the Tobacco Control Act, they only have the power of 18 and under. So, there's no problem with that. I don't even have no problem with 21, but federal statute has them restricted at 18 years and under. So you have that. I can understand have some good labeling requirements on e-liquids, mecmods, 2-mecmods, things of that nature. Especially because sometimes the vape shop owners or employees won't inform someone buying a 2-mecmod, or especially a hybrid 2-mecmod, to a newbie. It would be nice if there was a little labeling on that 2-mecmod that states this is only for advanced vapors. You must know, how to build. You must know how about 510 addies that stick out for your hybrids. I mean, these things should be part of the instructions of a 2-mecmod. Normally in a 2-mecmod, you just get in a box with no instructions, no labeling requirements. So I certainly can see that, okay? Because this is all about safety, to protect the public health. The whole point of the FDA final rule is to have safety standards so you can promote the protection of public health. So, I can understand that. I can understand, kids not being able to be in a adult. In other words, only a vending machine for vaping products can only be in an adult facility, and anyone under 18 can't go in there. I certainly can understand that. I mean, I can understand certain regulatory powers be in place. But it's this whole PMTA process that is just crazy as can be. And then the enforcement aspect of having that power to seize property, to criminally prosecute, to have civil or monetary penalties, to place injunctions on people's businesses is just way too much. Just way too much. So that is it for the executive orders. And as you can see, every single solitary executive order that the FDA final rule actually cites, and that is the Executive Order 12866 and Executive Order 13132 and Executive Order 13563. These three executive orders were in the FDA final rule. And guess what? The FDA final rule violated every single solitary section of these executive orders. And do you think Obama will say, wait, hold it here. I did Executive Order 13563 on January 18, 2011, and I can't believe the FDA violated all those sections. We're going to have to take care of this FDA final rule because I cannot handle them going against me. I'm the president. You think he'd say that? He approved of the FDA final rule. He's one of the biggest hypocrites in all politics. And he's not the only one, There's plenty of them out there. But anyway, That is the FDA executive orders. Those executive orders are in the FDA final rule. And I just wanted to show that the FDA final rule actually, in fact, violated presidential executive orders. And on that point, guys, have a good one.